You are listening to the Chasing PRs podcast, and today we are talking about the 5 most common injuries in runners and tips to prevent them. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Chasing PRs, a podcast for everyday runners who want to make the most out of their training and achieve new personal records while managing work, family, and life outside running.
Do you know the main exercises runners should focus on? Well, in the talk What You Must Know About Strength Training for Runners, we cover this and how strength training can be incorporated into a running routine. Just go to chasingprs.run to watch it for free.
I'm Rochelle Weeks.
I am Diego Alcubierre, and welcome to this episode.
We're going to talk about some running injuries, some of the more common ones that we see as physiotherapists.
Yeah. 80% of runners get injured every year, right?
Yeah. And we could talk about 20 different injuries, but we'll talk about the 5 main ones. Although, if you have an injury that we're not talking about today, you can pretty much guarantee that some of the treatment tips we talk about will apply.
And the whys.
Yeah.
And the why people get injured, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
So what are the five most common injuries you see every day?
The list is hard to narrow down to 5, but if I was to pick 5, it would be Achilles tendinopathy, plantar fasciopathy. So both of those, Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, you might more commonly hear. Itis means inflammation, so we try to use opathy now because there's no inflammation involved usually. So Achilles tendinopathy, plantar fasciopathy, patellofemoral pain syndrome, which is basically like beneath your kneecap. It's a runner's knee.
Runner's knee, yeah.
Shin splints and stress fractures. So those are probably the 5 if I had to pick.
Okay, and we're going to divide them like in 2 blocks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the first
three are more... The first 3 are just treated differently than the last 2 because the last 2 are bone injuries.
Okay.
And the treatment advice is very different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, tell us a little what each of these injuries is.
So Achilles tendon pain, probably definitely the most common one. So the Achilles is right at the back of your heel. It attaches your calf down to your calcaneus, the heel bone in your foot. And as runners, we use it a lot. So 8 times our body weight goes through Achilles in peak forces when we run. So that can get a little bit irritated, especially with like speed work and uphill. The plantar fasciopathy is on the bottom of the foot. So usually the bottom of the heel, but it can also grow up to like the arch of the foot as well.
Okay.
And that can get irritated. That's a fascia, not a tendon, but it's treated really similarly. Patellofemoral pain syndrome's a little bit trickier to explain because it's more of an irritation between the kneecap and the thigh bone, the femur. So there's an irritation of the tissues in there.
Okay.
And that one's called runner's knee, so it's not a tendon or a fascia like the first 2. Shin splints, people usually think is a muscle thing, like the muscles of the inside of the shin are bothered. But a true shin splint is actually the tibia, the shin bone.
Okay.
And the bone is starting to become inflamed, and there's actually little microscopic tears forming in the bone. That's a shin splint. And then a stress fracture is when that process happens to, there's a whole bunch of bones in the lower body it can happen to in runners. But those little microscopic tears happen, and then the runner is stubborn and keeps running through pain, and then one big tear forms, and then they have a stress fracture. Oh. And that can happen in like the hip, the knee, the shin, the feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
And tell us a little, why did you change? Sorry about that. Let me. Stop there. Okay. Sorry about the phones. We're in the conference room, so someone called in here, but we are not available, right?
It's unplugged.
So, why did physios are changing to saying tendinopathy instead of or tendonitis?
So tendonitis, itis means inflammation, and most runners, when they think something's inflamed, they're going to ice it and use anti-inflammatories. And for pretty much all the running injuries, icing it anti-inflammatories is just going to slow down the healing process. It'll feel really good in the moment, like if you have Achilles tendinopathy and you ice it and take an Advil, it'll feel good. But in the long run, pardon the pun, it's gonna linger around longer. It'll take you longer to get rid of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now we know the five most common. What are they? Why do they happen?
So most of the time, if I had to pick the top reason, it's not your running shoes. It's not because you don't stretch enough. Those are like the first things runners say. It's usually just from doing too much too soon and too fast. So this is what the research shows, is that as runners, we typically ramp stuff up too aggressively. We want to be better like yesterday, right? So we increase the frequency of our running too aggressively. We increase the volume of our running too aggressively, and sometimes we add in speed or hills too aggressively.
Okay.
So those are usually the three variables: volume, frequency, and intensity. And if we bring them up too quickly, and if we bring them up together, like we might be gradually increasing each, but if you're increasing all three at the same time, that's usually when we get injured.
Yeah, and I think when you say we up every one of them, it's the main point, because I see runners being very mindful about their mileage, for example, about the long run. No, I'm just going to run 2 more K this week and 2 more K. But they don't realize that they're adding more speed work or heels or another day of running and stuff like that. So that you said earlier that you need to change one parameter at a time.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And don't be afraid to run the same kilometers week after week after week if you are running faster or adding heels.
Yeah, if your base mileage is like 40K a week and you decide to add in some speed, if you're injury prone and you want to be a bit extra cautious, lower it down to 35 and then add in the speed and then keep the speed the same, go back to 40, and then just take turns playing with the variables, because usually people get their training program and they're adding in an extra run, they're building the long run, the weekly mileage is going up. Now they're going to do 1 speed session a week, sometimes 2, and it's too much. And I think a lot of runners, most programs I see these days are better, but I find a lot of programs, they don't have recovery weeks. So they're just, like, you look at this 16-week marathon program and week after week it's just more. Whereas the research shows, to absorb the training and to prevent overuse injuries and give your body time to recover, every 4th week should be like a deload week. So you might go, say if somebody does 50K one week, next week 55, the next week 60, they can't just go 65, 70, 75, 80. Like they could, but they're probably going to get injured. So after that 3rd week, when they hit 60, they should maybe do like a 45, 50K week, and then build again. Yeah,
if you see a training program that doesn't have has that down week, it's not a good training program.
Yeah, skip that one.
Yeah, I learned that there's a book called The Triathlete's Training Bible by Joe Friel, and it's the first time I read that he trains elite athletes and stuff like that. He stay in the same weekly mileage and strength when they do a strength training in the weight 3 or 4 weeks, the exact same mileage, the exact same training, because he says that your body, it's not fast enough to adapt to those. So people that are upping their long runs every week, in his opinion, it's not good. You need to do the same thing 3 weeks, have a down week, and then the next week you start to upping up. And I've been trying that for a few years now, and I've been injured.
Yeah.
but not as often as before.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to factor that in, because we can't demand more and more from our body month after month without scaling things down. And I think one thing, like, I get some runners who are just trying to peak all year, like all year long, they're trying to be as fast as they can be and push, but you need to have that off season, which is now for a lot of runners. A lot of the fall races are coming to an end. So you have that off season where your mileage comes down and you focus on strength training, but the mileage doesn't need to go too far down. Like for me, I try to keep it between 40 and 50K a week.
Okay.
Because then if my marathon program starts in January and I'm at 50K a week, usually you get injured in the build up. So if I'm already at 50 and I'm going to take myself to 80 maybe, that there's plenty of time to do that over 16, 20 weeks. But if a runner just takes too much time off, or it's winter so they're running like twice a week, when they start a program that involves 5 times a week, it's so aggressive that within the first couple months, they'll probably have one of these injuries.
And do you find true that most runners get injured, or you see a lot of runners injured in March, April?
Yeah, I usually find, so here we don't have a lot of races in the winter because it's so cold, but April, May is when most of them are. So a lot of people start training in January, and I find usually it's February or March. Like you can get away with this big jump in training for like the first 3 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
And then when they come in and I'm trying to figure out why they're injured, and I look at their mileage, which Strava and Garmin apps make really easy, you see this big spike, and usually it's happened 2 weeks or more before their injury, their little niggle started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to search. I had a screenshot of a person putting on Facebook like, I got injured, and he or she put her weekly mileage, and you can see the big jump there. I'm going to find it in a second.
Yeah.
And okay, we already talked about what are they?
Yeah, too much too soon
Why
is one
they
of the
happen.
main ones. Yeah, and there's a couple more for why.
Okay.
So there's too much too soon.
Okay.
The second one is probably muscle imbalances.
Okay.
So, and not tight muscles. Runners are obsessed with stretching. Stretching is not really something that should be focused. If stretching feels good, stretch, but there's no research to show that stretching prevents injury or helps performance. So strength training should be a focus. So for runners, we typically tend to have weak posterior chains. So posterior just means like our backside, our glutes, and then our hamstrings and our calves. So we tend to be weak there. We tend to be stronger in our quads. So then we start to see injuries. And sometimes there's a big difference left to right. Like someone injured their knee when they were younger, and now that quad and hamstring doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So that's another reason, is that runners think just because they run, that's going to make them strong. But running makes you have really good muscular endurance, but not strength. Strength is built in the gym, not running. So you need to do lower reps, higher weight. So that's behind the too much too soon. It's the strength training.
Okay.
And then
let me ask you something. I've heard about these imbalances, but is there something runners can do without seeing a specialist or a strength training coach or something like that about those imbalances?
Yeah, I think like it depends how deep people want to go. Like here we can do strength testing of every muscle and tell you in newtons how strong you are and put this elaborate program. Some runners are like, I have 3 kids and I'm lucky to run 4 days a week, or they have a full-time job and they just don't have time for all that. So even just 2-3 times a week, go on YouTube, go on Google and find single leg exercises, single leg, not double, because running is you're only on one leg, for the quad, the hamstrings, glute max, so your butt, glute med, which is outside your hip, and your calves. Those 5 muscle groups, if you find an exercise for each one of those and you do say 3 sets of 8 twice a week, that might be 20 minutes twice a week and you're good.
You're going to improve your imbalances and your strength overall.
Yeah, like you could do a single leg glute bridge, you could do some monster walks, hamstring curls, a Bulgarian split squat, single leg calf raises. Done. And you just need some light dumbbells and you've got everything covered. And then people say, well, what about the core? But if you start to engage, it's all single leg work. If you're holding weights, you're going to engage your core during those exercises.
Yeah. And that's like a way to start, as you're saying, because you can always go a little farther and a little farther. Then you hire someone to do a training routine for you. And then you go to the gym and work with a personal trainer. Then you come here and have a strength assessment. So
how deep do you want to go?
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's a great way to start start doing once a week. I just found the screenshot here. Look at these kilometers. For example, she said January 51 kilometers, February 10 kilometers, March 4 kilometers because fear of winter, April 27 kilometers, some sunlight running, May 180 kilometers, and in quotes it says lots of injuries, and there's a reason why, right?
That's a massive spike.
Exactly. 51, 10, 4, 27, 180. You are going to get injured no matter what. So she ended up running a marathon. It looks like here, the Stockholm Marathon.
Yeah.
Rest and relaxed run. Yeah, I after having a lot of injuries. But yeah, I think it's a perfect example of ramping up too much and having fear of winter and not running during winter.
And I tell people, like, because some people just like to ski in the winter, or they don't like to run in the winter. And I'm like, that's fine. Just don't sign up for a spring marathon because your body's doesn't have time to prepare for it. Do one in the fall.
Yeah.
But it's fine not to run in the winter and to hate winter running. But don't expect things out of your body that you haven't trained for over the past 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said there was another reason.
Yeah. So running form, I think people think it's more important than it is. Like everybody runs differently. If you look at the top 10 marathon runners at Berlin or Chicago, there's little different things that they do. But typically there's a general way that you should run and there's things that you should avoid doing. So the biggest thing that I look at when I'm doing a gait analysis on someone is their cadence.
Okay.
So if the cadence is really low, and cadence is different for everybody. So for a while, people thought 180, 180 steps per minute for all runners. Now
and all
we know,
paces.
And all paces, exactly. Now we know, like, how tall are you, Diego?
6'1".
You're 6'1". So if you're out doing a 5:30 pace, which would be slow for you, at a 180 cadence, you're going to look like the Roadrunner from those cartoons. It's going to look silly. But if I see someone who's 5'1", and they're out doing a 4 minute per kilometer pace, they might need to be 190.
Yeah.
So you can check with a gait analysis, but basically the cadence is probably the most bang for your buck to try to figure out what yours should be based on speed and height. And usually if you nail it down right, then you won't overstride. So a lot of runners think that they shouldn't be heel striking. We could do a whole podcast on heel striking. We should.
Yeah.
But I'll just say heel striking is fine as long as you're not overstriding.
Yeah.
And there's like leaning forward from the ankles, not being too upright. There's the knee position, angling in towards each other. There's all these little things that we can pick apart, but you could have Kipchoge running style, like beautiful form, and if you do too much too soon, doesn't matter. You're going to get injured. Or if your hamstrings and your glutes suck and are really weak, doesn't matter how good your form is. So it kind of all has to gel together. Runners like to blame their shoes because then
it's easy
you get to go shopping.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like this quick fix. Well, I'm just going to buy new shoes and then my pain will be gone.
Yeah.
It's very rarely the shoes. Sometimes it is, but not very often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to give you an example about pacing and cadence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 6'1". I do my easy runs around 450 per kilometer. We need to do the conversion for our listeners in the US at once. But 450 per kilometer. And my cadence is like 170.
Yeah.
But when I'm running a 5K pace, it's almost 200.
Yeah, which would be like 330
Like
pace or faster, right?
Yeah, like 320.
Yeah.
So it's not. I never run at 180,
Yeah.
right? But it's the cadence I've been working on. And when I started doing triathlons like 10 years ago, one of my coaches was like, "Your cadence is too low."
Mm-hmm.
And I worked on it with speed ladder and just my Garmin has a metronome, so you can feel the vibration in your wrist. I started at 180 just to get used to running faster, and then naturally my cadence just go to 170 and around 200 depending on the pace.
As a general rule, most runners, unless you're really tall, should be at least 170.
Okay.
Usually if I see below 170, there's overstriding happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a good learning from this. Just set on your Garmin if it has the option. 170 for your easy runs. Mm-hmm. If you are not doing it, it's gonna feel hard and fast, but with practice it will improve. About running form, like one question. You're talking about running form just in respect of injuries, right? Not on performance, not on...
I guess this is the thing.
I think my question is...
It crosses over.
When do people need to worry about their running form?
I think if you have no injury trouble and you're happy with your performance, you can actually get into trouble if you try to address your running form. Because usually if you change things suddenly, like if you're a midfoot striker, you're putting more pressure on your calf and your Achilles and your fascia, plantar fascia. If you're a heel striker, you're putting more pressure on your shin, your knees, your hips, your back. So if you take one of those runners and swap them to the other, and there's no injury trouble, you're just doing it to try to make them faster, you're suddenly loading this area that isn't used to as much load. And so the heel striker suddenly develops Achilles tendinopathy because they're trying to midfoot. So if you do feel like you need to transition, you have to do it really, really slowly and let the body kind of slowly adjust. But I think this is kind of the fun part being a running physio, is that I get people coming in who are injured running, and often the reason they're injured running might be their cadence is too low, or they did too much too soon, or they're not strong in their posterior chain. So we fix those things. The running injury goes away, but it makes them faster. Like if your hamstrings are stronger, you're going to run faster.
Exactly.
If your cadence is low and you're overstriding and you fix that, you're going to run faster. So it's fun. So when you say, like, is it for injuries or is it for performance, it does kind of cross over a little bit.
Okay.
And I think the one that not that I forgot to say it, but we're going to do a podcast on this, so I won't go into detail. But lack of recovery would be up there after form too. So you can train aggressively hard all you want and be super strong with great form, but if you don't recover and prioritize sleep, nutrition, easy runs, you're in big trouble. Yeah.
So let's summarize the main 3 reasons why injuries occur. It's
too much too soon.
Yeah.
That's the big one.
Okay.
Too much too soon, muscle imbalances.
Okay.
And running form.
And do you think it's the order people need to look at their injuries?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think strength, and I think the too much too soon is the top one by a long shot.
Okay.
And then the strength, running form is there, but it's behind. And then arguably, I think some people would argue that recovery should probably come after too much too soon, before the muscle imbalances and before the running form too. Because at the elite level, well, they can only perform so well because they sleep 10-hour days and
take naps and
spend lots of time. Like, they're often not working full time, although some have full-time jobs, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, and those are the reasons for the 5 injuries, you think?
For all running injuries, but yeah, all 5. Because the last 2 are more bone injuries, and the first 3 are tendon, fascia, joint, but that covers all running injuries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about what can I do if I start to feel some pain in the Achilles or in the plantar fascia or my knee? What steps can I take before it develops into a big injury that makes me stop running, that I need to go to see a physio, stuff like that? What can runners do if they start to feel a niggle?
So I think there's 2 categories probably to talk about. So there's the runner that does a run today and wakes up tomorrow morning and says, oh, I feel my heel a little bit. And then there's the runner listening to this that might have had Achilles issues for the last 6 months. Yeah. So the really easy ones that I never get to see are the ones that it just started, because no one comes in right away. They wait for it to get really bad, usually. So if you just wake up and you just feel this little niggle, this is when it's important to modify your training program. So if you do a long run and you wake up and you're supposed to do a recovery run today and your Achilles is bothering you a little bit, that is the day you don't do a recovery run. You listen to your body, especially if it's pain the next day. Your body's telling you did too much the day before, or in the preceding weeks it's kind of building and it's too much. So you skip that run. And maybe the day 2 or 3 you're supposed to have a speed session. Maybe you just keep it easy instead of doing the speed, because speed is going to load the Achilles more, or hills. And you basically, like, I would wait until you're not feeling your Achilles or whatever the injury is, walking around the house, at work, up and down the stairs, it's gone, and then you try a short, easy run, and then maybe after 7 days of modifying, you're back to your regular program and like nothing happened.
Okay.
Most of the time, the runners who are struggling are the ones who are running through. They didn't do that. They kept running, hoping that they would run through it and it would just work its way out. And it didn't. Now they've been like a year with Achilles issues, or like 2 months or something like that. Yeah. So in those situations, this is where the treatment differs. So if it's a tendon issue, if it's a plantar fascia issue, the knee joint, the hip joint, that sort of thing, as long as the pain is not worse the day after your run, the run was okay. And as long as the pain didn't go beyond like maybe a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, because it's normal to be sore, right? I know when I'm training really hard for a marathon, I'm always sore.
Yeah.
I always wake up with some niggles and stuff like that, but they are not worse than the day before, or I can run and the next day it's not worse and worse and worse. Because I talk to people and they say, okay, if I stopped every time I have a niggle, I will never run.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be stopping and paranoid and not running all the time. It's more when the same niggle presents itself in like a couple, 2 or 3 runs. then you want to be worried about it. But the science behind like tendinopathies and fasciopathy right now is saying pain no more than a 4 during the run is acceptable. No increase in symptoms 24 hours later, which is usually the next day.
Okay.
If you're hobbling down the road or it's a 5 or 6 and you're grinning, at, kind of grimacing and
that's when you need to pay
clenching your
attention.
teeth, shut that run down. Call an Uber, call your family member, they need to come get you. But if it's just there and it's kind of annoying, but you can still talk to your friend and it's not that bad, then the next day the symptoms aren't worse. That was okay. And normally if someone's dealing with an injury, I do my best to keep them running, because the last thing I want to say to a runner is stop running.
Because it's awful to not run.
And it's actually, if you look at the research and the science, it's not recommended. So for the tendons and the fasciopathies, like these first 3 categories, complete rest is usually not the answer. I had someone come in to see me who took a year off running and still couldn't get back into running because of his Achilles. And I looked at him and said, we have to get you running. You need to run. I didn't send him off on 10K or anything. He was doing like a run walk program. But usually you want to find that sweet spot where you can run this amount, you feel it a bit, but it's mild and it's not worse the next day. Then you start strength training that area. So this is where you might need a little bit of help, but like typically if it's the Achilles, it's going to be some sort of calf raise variation depending on where the pain is in the Achilles. Same with the plantar fascia. For the knee, usually you're going to try to strengthen up the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads. The knee is a bit more complicated. But you try to strengthen these areas while you pull back your running. And then say if you're like, well, I can do 8K and my Achilles doesn't bother me the next day, but anything over 10 and it does. You stick to 8 while you do your calf raises, you add weight, you make it stronger, then suddenly you can do 10, then 12, then 14, and it builds. And I usually get people to pull back from speed and hills during that time.
Okay.
And depending on what it is, sometimes trail running. So certain injuries like peroneal tendinopathy or tibialis posterior tendinopathy, these are things on the outside of your ankles. They're a lot worse on the trails.
Tell us that in plain English.
So the tib post is on the inside of the ankle and the peroneal tendon's on the outside.
Okay.
Right kind of along the sides of your ankle bone. So if you have a tendinopathy there, trails might make that really bad. So you might be able to do 10K on the road, but 2K on the trail. So then I'm telling people like avoid the trail, stay on the road, flat, easy, and then I can keep them running. And then as their pain settles, we start to add in speed, hills, trails. We get them back doing what they wanted to do, but you just kind of rein things in a little bit. But this is where it's different because shin splints and stress fractures.
Okay, let me ask
totally
you a question
different.
before we go into that. So can I run a full training cycle in a pain 4 level in one part of my body?
You can, as
because
long as you
what
don't
I've been
see
doing
it's
for the last 2
increasing.
months.
Yeah, as long as it's not increasing.
Okay.
Like if you notice like you've got this little Achilles thing, but as long as you sleep good and rest and have your recovery days and strength train, it stays at bay and your mileage is going up, but the Achilles pain's not following it.
Okay.
That's okay, but you want to deal with that after. Like as soon as you're recovered, you want to, like the race is done, time to deal with that.
Yeah, because I've been managing since August, since Big to Brew, some pain in my butt.
Okay.
And I've just been managing it. I've been able to run and increase my mileage and everything, but every day I need to like massage it a little, or on weekends I'm taking some Epsom salt baths and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just managing it, and I think a lot of runners are going to do that. And trying to manage it, I think it's one of the main reasons we get really injured, because you just said it, we want to push through it, or maybe it's going to get better by some miracle.
Yeah, you're kind of in denial too, because running is like, for a lot of people, running is kind of their therapy. It's their alone time, especially if you have busy work and family life, or just one or the other. But I think as long as like, what runners have to be careful, because they hear this 4 out of 10. But if your pain starts, you get pain in your glute and it starts at 18K. And then after a couple weeks, now you're noticing at 12. Now you're noticing at 10. Now you're noticing at 8.
Yeah.
It's still only a 4, but it's getting worse because you're noticing it sooner and sooner and sooner.
Okay.
Or say you feel it the next day, and now it's more the next day, more the next day. Those are things, you don't want to see this growth of the pain as your mileage builds.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to ask because we don't know how runners are. Or we are runners, and we just don't like to stop training. And I think before we go into the stress fractures and what was the other one? The shin splints.
Yeah.
It's 1 week not training, it's not going to ruin your race.
No,
right?
absolutely not.
1 day not training, 1 week. Well, and we're not saying 1 week of doing nothing. It's just 1 week of scaling back, of not cutting short your long run, not doing your speed session. It's not going to be a big, it's not going to make or break your race.
Yeah.
That's my point.
To give an example, I had a client of mine just do the Petit Train du Nord. My French isn't good, so sorry if you're French. I just butchered that. That's in Quebec, and it's a full marathon. And she, her goal was to go under 3:45, and on like a stretch goal, she's feeling really good, was to go under 3:40. And she panicked 3 weeks out because she felt this peroneal tendon pain on the outside of her ankle. And I just told her, take a few days off. And we emailed back and forth, take another couple days. And she was freaking out because she pictured losing all this fitness, and she was supposed to get a 32K run in on Sunday. And I said, if you just follow your training program, you're not going to be at that start line. You have to just pull back, trust the process. You've been training for 18 weeks.
And that's the point.
That's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And sometimes people are having training for years, right? So all the years you've been training add up to this training cycle.
Exactly.
Obviously, we all have 3-4 months of training for one race specifically, but all the training you've been doing for years, it's going to help. Sorry, I interrupted you. So what happened to her?
She took a week off, which was very stressful. She did some biking because that was okay for the issue she had. Then we just guided her slowly through her taper, so she missed her longest run.
Yep.
And she did 3:37.
Oh.
So she got her stretch goal and felt excellent afterwards.
That's a great example.
The tendon didn't even bother her during the race or the next day. Cool. And so if she hadn't had that guidance and just pushed through, maybe she wouldn't have even been able to race it.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, I think it's important that everyone knows that no training cycle is perfect. So the guy that is right next to you at the starting line, I bet he had some injuries or days off, or didn't finish a long run, or it was too hot, or it was too cold, got sick, her kid got sick, didn't sleep. We all go through it. As long as you are consistent over the long run, you're good to go.
I find if I have a runner come in and they have their training program and every single run has a checkbox, that's a red flag for me. They don't know how to modify their runs. They're running. There's no way you can get through a whole training program and you shouldn't have modified something in there because you didn't sleep, you were sick, there was something happened at work.
That's why sometimes having a coach is really important, right? Because he can coach you through those kind of bad days that we all have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so can we make a little summary of what we can do? It's scaling down our training, doing some strength training, and what else?
That's it. Focus on recovery and
it's
just
easy,
slowly. And I think figure out why you got there. Because I feel like an FBI kind of agent sometimes. I joke with my patients because they come in and I'm like, okay, tell me about your training. Show me your Strava. And we're investigating. And it's like, oh, you went from 50K a week to 65 to 70 to 80 without a recovery week. And those are big jumps. And then don't do that again. Yeah. So then that's probably really important to make sure you just don't do that again. Figure out what you did wrong and adjust it.
Cool. Yeah, and luckily we have Strava and our Garmin apps, and you can see your training in a snapshot really easily.
It's easier than it has ever been.
Okay, so and stress fractures and the shin splints occur because of the same reasons.
Yeah,
practically.
More nutrition is more important.
Okay.
So these are bone stress injuries. So stress fractures is basically when there's a tear in the bone, and depending on the stress fracture site, if you continue running and push through the pain, that little tear can actually completely break the bone. Okay. And then you need surgery and cast and boot, and you're not running for a long time. And shin splints is basically a stress reaction on the bone in the inside of the lower third of the shin.
Okay.
So it's usually too much too soon, frequency, volume, intensity. It definitely can be lack of strength training, because if you're lifting heavy weights, you're loading your bones as well. So people who lift heavy have stronger bones, especially if they do plyometrics. Plyometrics, jumping exercises are really good for the bones. But one thing we see a lot with runners is bone stress injuries because of lack of nutrition.
Okay.
So there's something called RED-S. It's relative energy deficiency in sport. And it just means that your energy in, so your food calories in, is not meeting the energy out with your training.
You're not eating enough.
You're not eating enough. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And then so what happens is you start to get low bone density.
Okay.
And when you have low bone density because you're not getting enough nutrition and you're losing calcium from your bones, then you can get a bone stress injury or even just the full extent, which is the stress fracture.
And the main reason people are not eating enough is because they want to lose weight.
Sometimes it's weight loss, sometimes it's we see a lot of stress fractures at the elite level.
Okay.
So they're running like 160 kilometers plus a week, and they feel like they're eating a lot, but because they're burning so many calories during the week with their running, even though they think they're eating enough, they're not.
They're not.
So sometimes it's not a purposeful, I'm going to cut calories, but then I find, so that's at the elite level.
Yeah.
At more like amateur competitive level, certainly it's like they have this impression that if they're lighter, they'll be faster.
Yeah.
So, and the worst thing you can do during a marathon build is go on a diet, because that's when you should be fueling and focusing. So if you feel like you want to lose weight and you think it's a healthy weight loss goal, do that before your program starts. But often we see the stress fractures. I'll ask people about their diet, and I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian, but I'll refer them pretty quickly if I think that it's not right.
Yeah, about losing weight during a marathon, I think it was Galen Rupp. I once read once that he knows how to stay. I can remember his weight. I don't know, 150 or something like that. Eating well and training, but when he wants to take it up a notch and lose a few pounds, he does it generally in the during tapering.
Yeah.
Because your mileage is going down, so you can cut back a little in your food. And I've been trying that. In Mexico we don't use pounds, we use kilograms. But I usually train at 77 kilograms. It's like 170 pounds,
Okay.
I think.
And that's where you feel strong and healthy and
Yeah.
like you have energy but lean.
But I always try to go to 75, that it's 4 pounds less for race week.
Yeah.
So I weighed myself yesterday, and I am at 76, so I lost 2 pounds in the last week, and hopefully I can lose another 2 pounds for race
And you're
week.
in the taper right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's next week, next Sunday. So, and I feel good. I think that's important.
I think that's the big thing. Like
Yeah.
if you want to simplify it and think, am I eating enough? How do you feel? Do you feel like crap after your long runs? Do you feel like you have energy for long runs? Do your speed sessions go well? In between your runs, are you tired and lethargic and moody even though you're sleeping well? These are, if you want to get more into like the nitty gritty personal details, the easiest, for women it's way easier than men. And it's tricky though if women are on any sort of birth control. But if women lose their period,
Okay.
that's a huge red flag that they're not eating enough.
Okay.
So if you haven't had your period in more than 3 months, that's a big red flag. But
Okay.
then some people are like, I have an IUD or I'm on a pill or whatever.
Yeah, it's just a.
So
like
it's a general
Exactly.
guideline. And then for men, it's more sex drive.
Okay.
So if men are training aggressively and they just find they have low sex drive, that's the red flag for men. But really, to simplify it, it's just, how do you feel?
Exactly.
Is your partner ready to bite your head off because you're kind
Being
of
moody,
bitchy and moody?
exactly.
Then maybe you're not eating enough.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, but that's the big, I would add that in as a big cause on top of the too much too soon and muscle imbalances, running form, that nutrition and sleep and recovery is huge for stress fractures.
And I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the big difference about treating these injuries is with the tendon and soft tissue injuries, you can keep running, but with the shin splits and stress fractures, it's not recommended to keep running.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we confirm someone has a bone stress injury, which is both of those, it's zero pain policy. Like you're not allowed to have any pain running. So normally, depending on where the stress fracture is, sometimes they have to be in a walking boot, crutches. Not always, but sometimes, depends on where it is. We won't go into the science of all that. But then once the person's ready to return to running, usually you want to be able to walk pain-free and hop up and down on one foot pain-free.
Okay.
Then you do this gradual reintroduction to running, but if the pain comes back, you shut it down.
Awesome.
Whereas with the Achilles, I'm like, 4 out of 10 is okay as long as it's not worse the next day.
Yeah.
Shin splints, bone stress injury, I'm like, you need to stop.
Okay.
And if it's a high risk stress fracture site, meaning that it could break, then I'm aggressively telling someone you need to stop, and I'm getting the orthosurgeon involved and MRIs, and I'm a bit more aggressive.
Okay. So let's try to dumb this down or simplify it as much as you can, because at the end of the day, human beings, we're looking for the shortcut all the time. We're not recommending the shortcut, but I think if there are two things that you can recommend people to avoid injuries as best as they can, because they're gonna get injured. Don't get upset, or don't feel that you are special because you're getting injured. We all do. What would you recommend them?
I'd say the first one would be consistent with your running.
Okay.
Because if you don't have these big peaks and valleys and you're kind of staying, there's a frequency of running that you're doing somewhat. It does come up and down a bit, but you stay relatively
You don't go to
consistent.
0 or 10 kilometers like the like
Exactly. So that consistency and kind of gradual progressions, and then strength training.
Okay.
Especially in the off season, when you're in between races, you really work on your strength, and then you can like tone it back a little bit so that you're not doing these 2 heavy strength sessions a week plus running high mileage. Those two would be, runners do very well to follow that advice.
Awesome. I'm sure we will do a follow-up session on injuries. If you have any questions, please let us know at chasingprs.run. But yeah, I think Richelle today told us a lot of good advice on how to prevent them, how to manage them, and why they happen. And it's part of a runner's life to be injured, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Even at the elite level, so
exactly.
You're not alone.
I think that's a good one. Even if the elites get injured with all the teams they have behind them, you are going to get injured.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the runner of the week. Okay, so our runner of the week is Michael Voice.
Mike
Why?
Mike is crazy. He's so fast and consistent.
Yeah.
I've never known him to not have a good race. Mike did the Toronto Waterfront Marathon, 2:45:32, and
he's 51.
Yeah, you're no spring chicken, Mike. Sorry, but you're 51, and that's phenomenal. He was first in his age group at that time.
I look up to him a lot because I think he's super consistent, and I've never seen him injured. And you just talk about it. Like, one of the main ways to stay injury free is to be consistent year round and year after year after year after year. So congrats to Mike of doing that marathon. I think he was like 20 seconds from his best time. So
he's getting faster.
Exactly.
As he ages.
I think his best time was like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was, and this one is a harder course than the other one. So
and the other one, yeah.
Maybe in the other course he will beat in his time. 6 years later, plus 50. So I just read in Facebook the other day that I'm 40. Am I too late to start running marathons? And I was like, come on.
Yeah. The answer is no.
Yeah, exactly.
Never too late.
Never too late to start running marathons. So congrats to Mike. If you want to nominate someone for the runner of the week, you can go to chasingprs.run, and we'll be super happy to showcase and talk about a big accomplishment you have. It doesn't have to be a fast marathon. It doesn't have to be a Boston qualifier. I know. I bet there are a lot of inspiring stories out there that we can share about.
Absolutely.
And then we can talk about our chasing sprints. What are we talking about today?
So we have 3 elite level runners that we wanted to talk about. And the reason we're bringing them up is because, well, they're very, very fast. But all 3 of them, they didn't do negative splits in their marathon, which we found interesting.
Yeah, it surprised me. We talk about, in the runner world, a lot about, if you want to run a fastest marathon, do negative split. Even in a 5K, I've heard people do negative splits in your 5K. I've never done it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, Eliud Kipchoge ran the fastest marathon, official marathon ever, right? And he didn't do negative splits. Then I'm going to let Richelle say the names of these runners.
We'll try to pronounce these. So I believe it's Tigist Assefa. She had the 3rd fastest female marathon ever. And Ruth Chepnigich, she won the Chicago Marathon and was only 14 seconds off the world record. She was very close, but both were positive splits.
Yeah, and Tigist, she won the Berlin Marathon.
Yes.
but it was the third fastest marathon ever. So I think our point with this is that you need to take everything with a grain of salt. Not because someone says, if you don't run negative splits, you're not going to run a fast marathon. That's not true. Maybe you will, because generally if you run negative splits, you run faster races, generally. But it surprised us that these 3 super fast runners didn't do it and almost break. Well, Elliot broke his own record, and the other 2 runners ran the second and the third fastest marathons ever, right? Yeah. So thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing PRs. See you on the next one.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you love it, give it a share. Please consider subscribing to the show and leaving a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify. And visit chasingprs.run for all the latest episodes, get our free newsletter, and all the cool running stuff we have there. Thanks for joining.